Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity and for selecting my abstract for oral presentation. So I'll be giving a talk on immunodeficiency and bone marrow failure that we identified in patients with mosaic and germline TLR8 gain of function. So first, I'll introduce the clinical phenotype of these patients. So we have a cohort of 6 unrelated male patients who presented with neutropenia, lymphoproliferation, hypogammaglobulinemia, and they were susceptible to a wide range of bacterial and fungal infections. As I stated, all patients had extremely low absolute neutrophil counts, and multiple patients had a very poor response to GCSF therapy as well. 2 patients were identified to be positive for anti-neutrophil antibodies. 1 patient was identified with a T-LGL leukemic phenotype, and 1 patient had a presence of dominant T cell clone, suggesting the presence of an activated T cell phenotype in these patients. Current status of the patients being 1 patient died at 8 years of age due to fungal infections. 3 patients had to undergo a bone marrow transplant due to bone marrow failure, and 1 patient unfortunately died post-transplant. And 2 patients are currently on GCSF therapy, and they require IVIG in view of their hypogammaglobulinemia. Firstly, I would like to point out that we did see a variability in the age of presentation, with 2 patients having a very early onset of presentation, whereas the others presented somewhere in their childhood. In all these patients, clinical exome sequencing identified variants in the gene TLR8, which encodes for toll-like receptor. It's a gene that's located on the X chromosome. What was even interesting was that of these 6 patients, 5 patients were identified to be mosaic for the variant, which meant that the variant was present only in a subset of cells. And of these, 4 patients carried the same mosaic variant, which is P432L. The patient number 3 carried a different mosaic variant, that's F494L. And the 6th patient harbored a de novo germline hemizygous missense variant on a completely different location. A little about TLR8. TLR8 encodes for toll-like receptor 8, and it belongs to the family of toll-like receptors that we know serve as pathogen sensors. So TLR8 specifically is an endosomal pathogen sensor. It's located on the X chromosome, and it's particularly abundantly expressed in monocytes, macrophages, myeloid dendritic cells, and neutrophils. So TLR8 exists as a preformed dimer, and ligand binding induces a conformational change that causes upregulation of NF-kappa B related inflammatory cytokines, or IRF7 mediated upregulation of type 1 interferon signature. So TLR8 is one of the most poorly studied member of the TLR family. And one of the main reasons for this is a lack of a suitable small animal model, because mouse TLR8 is different from human TLR8. And especially the mice TLR8 lacks these 5 amino acids that are highly essential for human TLR8 functioning. And that's one of the many reasons why human TLR8 is there's very limited literature available on the function and regulation of human TLR8. Also, very importantly, there's been no genetic defect in TLR8 that has been identified so far, which has been associated with any human disease. And this makes the study even more interesting. So as I stated, 5 of our patients were mosaic for the variant. So the first question we wanted to address was, in the mosaic patients, what percentage of cells carried the variant and which tissues carry the variant? Because with mosaicism, we need to remember that these are post-zygotic mutational events, and the timing of mutational event determines the tissue distribution. So for that, we used a very powerful technique called as ddPCR, which fractionates your DNA sample into multiple droplets, around 20,000 odd droplets. We make use of reference probes and wild type reference probes and variant probes. And then we run PCR cycle on each of these individual droplets, and then look for concentration, or look for the number of droplets that have the variant sequences and droplets that have the reference sequence. So these are ddPCR fluorescence plots that we saw for patient P1, where we looked at his whole blood samples, his fibroblast samples, and also sorted immune subsets. And we saw that, as indicated by the quadrant represented by the upper left quadrant here, we saw that the patient had droplets carrying the variant in all of the samples tested, suggesting that since the variant was present both in non-hematopoietic cells as well as hematopoietic cells, perhaps in this patient, the mutational event was a very early embryonic development, occurred at a very early stage of embryogenesis. Similarly, we looked at or assessed for mosaicism in other patients. And we saw that overall, less than 30% cells carried the variant. Since the patients are manifesting the disease with less than 30% cells carrying the variant, we hypothesized that these variants result in a dominant effect. And we were also able to look at the fibroblast samples for 4 of these patients, and 3 patients, as indicated by the red star here, had the variant in the fibroblasts, suggesting that in all these patients, perhaps the mutational event must have occurred prior to the pluripotent stem cell commitment towards hematopoietic or non-hematopoietic branch. We did not see any differences in the TLR8 expression by flow cytometry. So some of the notable differences, notable findings that we saw in these patients were, we did see a hyperinflammatory cytokine signature in the patient's serum. So when we saw high levels of IL-18, we saw high levels of IL-18 binding protein, which prolongs the half-life of IL-18. We saw high levels of interferon gamma, BAF, IL-12, 23, P40, soluble CD25, a T cell activation marker. We also looked for serum fast ligand levels in the patient's sera, which we know is a marker for lymphoproliferative disorders. And also, it's considered to be a mediator of neutropenia in LGL leukemias or even chronic idiopathic neutropenia. And we saw that multiple patients had high levels of serum fast ligand as well, which was very interesting. Then we wanted to see if there were any abnormalities in the T cell compartments and the B cell compartments. So we saw that multiple patients had an inverse CD4-CD8 ratio. Multiple patients had a skewed naive to memory ratio, and multiple patients had highly elevated levels of CD8 positive terminally differentiated effector memory T cells, that's the TEMRA cells, which suggested that multiple patients had T cells with an activated phenotype. And we think this could be inflammation that's driving this T cell activation, and we think that's the dominant effect of the inflammatory environment, which is actually responsible for the activated T cell phenotype that we are seeing in these patients. When we looked at the B cell compartment, we saw that multiple patients had low B cell numbers, and 2 patients had normal B cell numbers, but all of them had reduced memory B cells and reduced class switch memory B cells, which also correlated with the very high levels of BAF that we saw in the sera, because we know it's the memory B cells that consume a lot of BAF. Again, the 2 patients who had normal B cell numbers, we saw that they also had reduced transitional B cells, suggesting that at least in these 2 patients, there's perhaps a defect both in transitioning as well as maturation of B cells. So then we wanted to answer the question as to what were these variants, how are these variants altering the protein function? And second, what is the consequence of these variants on myeloid cell differentiation and function? In order to address these questions, first we decided to make use of the patient primary cells themselves, but the problem was mosaicism. So we need to remember that less than 30% cells carried the variant. So we decided to make use of phospho-NF-kappa B as a readout. And when we did that and used TL8506, which is a highly specific TLR8 agonist, we saw that at a higher dose of stimulation, we did not actually see differences between how the patient cells responded as compared to healthy control cells. But what was really encouraging to see was that when we used a low dose of TL8506 stimulation, there were very few percentage of cells, patient cells, around 5 to 6%, which did respond to this low dose of stimulation, which was completely lacking when we saw healthy controls. So with this knowledge, in order to understand the functional consequence of these variants, we decided to make use of a TLR8 deficient cell line. So this is the NF-kappa B reporter cell line. So we transiently transfected the cells with wild-type TLR8, the patient TLR8 variants, and a previously reported TLR8 loss of function. We used the same TL8506 ligand, and we did a dose curve response. So we saw that the patient group was specifically responsive at lower dose of TL8506 stimulation. The wild type catches up only at a high dose, and the loss of function remained unresponsive even at the highest dose of stimulation, suggesting that these patient variants were hyper-responsive to TLR8 stimulation. Perhaps they have a lower activation threshold, or perhaps we can say they lead to gain of function. So in order to establish this in patient primary cells and to tackle the issue of mosaicism, we decided to use the patient stem cells themselves. So using the cultured skin fibroblasts of the patients, we reprogrammed them into iPSCs, which were single cell cloned, and again, making use of ddPCR, we identified those iPSC clones that carry just the wild type sequence and those iPSC clones that carry the variant sequence and differentiated them into CD34s. which were further differentiated into neutrophils and macrophages. So using this system, we were efficiently able to differentiate both wild-type derived iPSCs and variant-derived iPSCs into neutrophils. Then we wanted to assess their functional responses to stimulation. So we decided to again use phospho and F-kappa B as a readout, making use of T-rate 506, again a dose curve response. We saw that the variant-bearing macrophages or neutrophils were particularly responsive to low dose of stimulation, which is indicated by these arrowheads here, where we saw both F494L and P432L derived neutrophils, particularly responsive to low doses, that's 25 nanogram per ml or 100 nanogram per ml, as compared to wild-type derived neutrophils. Similarly, we also differentiated them into macrophages, and we were able to efficiently differentiate both wild-type and variant-derived iPSCs into macrophages. And then when we assessed their function, we saw that again, the variant-bearing macrophages were again particularly responsive to lower doses of stimulation, which was completely lacking in the wild-type. We use these macrophages to assess for cytokine production responses. And we saw that when we used, again, a low dose of stimulation, that's 25 nanogram per ml, we saw that the variant-bearing macrophages were producing more IL-6, TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta as compared to the wild-type bearing macrophages. In this system, we also made use of a TLR7 ligand, and we saw that there were no production differences in the production responses between the variant-bearing and the wild-type macrophages, suggesting that these variants were particularly hyper-responsive to TLR8 stimulation, and that these variants do lead to gain of function. They have a lower activation threshold for TLR8 stimulation. So with any TLR signaling mediated hyperinflammation or any TLR overactivation that leads to inflammatory diseases, inflammatory disorders, the potential therapeutic strategy that's considered is blocking the TLR signaling. So this can be accomplished by multiple approaches, and one such way is making use of these inhibitors that block ligand binding. So we were really curious to see how these patient variants respond to inhibitor treatment. So we made use of CuCpt9a, which is a highly specific TLR8 inhibitor. So I would like to quickly remind again that TLR8 exists as a preformed dimer, and ligand binding induces a conformational change, and that's very much important for the signaling cascade to be initiated. So CuCpt9a binds to a site which is very close to the ligand binding site. So this binding stabilizes the resting state of TLR8, and because it stabilizes the resting state, the addition of agonist would not induce any conformational change. Basically, it inhibits the TLR-dependent signaling, and there'll be no NF-kappa B activation. So when we did some protein modeling studies, these modeling studies predicted that all these mutant sites induce some conformational change that can hinder the binding of CuCpt9a. So with P432L, a mutant having the highest steric hindrance, followed by F494L, followed by G572D. So we're really curious how the patient-specific iPSCs with the variant will respond, how they will respond to the inhibitor pretreatment. And for that, we again use a similar approach of differentiating the iPSCs into macrophages. But before stimulating them with the agonist, we pre-treated these variant-specific macrophages or the wild-type specific macrophages with the inhibitor, 5 micromolar of the inhibitor for 2 hours. And then looked at the cytokine to look at the production responses for TNF-alpha and for IL-6. So here, open bars indicate cells that have not been pre-treated, and colored bars indicate cells that have been pre-treated with the inhibitor. So as expected, we saw that inhibitor pre-treatment completely inhibited the wild-type TLR8 activity. We did not see any TNF-alpha production or IL-6 production. But what was really interesting to see was that the patient variants were completely uninhibited. So here, as you can see, the inhibitor pretreatment failed to inhibit the activity of the variant TLR8, suggesting that these variants perhaps confer kind of resistance to the inhibitor treatment. So we are right now testing how other variants respond to the inhibitor pretreatment, and we are also considering using other classes of inhibitors to see how the variants respond. But these findings were especially very important for the patient therapy point of view, from immunotherapy point of view, and highlight the very important role of genetic and functional analysis to design personalized treatment approaches for these patients. With that, I would like to summarize my talk by stating that we've identified TLR8 variants, which result in a very broad clinical spectrum, including lymphoproliferation, neutropenia, B cell defects, and bone marrow failure in few cases. We saw that 10 to 20% of cells who had the variant were sufficient to cause a disease, and dominant effect of the variants leads to a hyper-inflammatory response. But there's some questions that we still need to address. First is with respect to neutropenia. I stated that we saw 2 patients having anti-neutrophil antibodies, but multiple other patients did not. That suggests that there could be multiple other factors leading to neutropenia. One could be apoptosis, the high serum fast ligand mediated neutropenia, or it could also be myelosuppressive effect of activated T cells or monocytes. The second is with respect to the B cell defects. The data that I did not show here was that when we assessed the bone marrow of 2 patients, we saw that the bone marrow of these patients also had a hyperinflammatory signature. And there are multiple reports which state that hyperinflammatory bone marrow microenvironment can affect B cell development. So we think it could be inflammation that's suppressing B cell development. Again, with the T cell phenotype, the hyperactivated T cell phenotype that we see in these patients could be inflammation, the hyperinflammation that's driving T cell activation, or it could also be altered T cell and dendritic cell interactions, because dendritic cells express TLR8, and that interaction could also result in this activated T cell phenotype that we are seeing in these patients. So currently, we are highly focused on understanding the mechanism of neutropenia in these patients, especially considering experiments involving co-cultures to see if it could be myelosuppressive effects or it could be apoptosis mediated. With that, I would like to end my talk, and I would like to thank all my lab members, especially Dr. Megan Cooper, all our collaborators, all our funding sources. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you for your attention.